Go down the hill.
All right, wait a minute. Can you hear me now?
Yes!
My throat is
Thank you guys all for being here tonight. Thank you all for your patience as we figure all this stuff out. Phoebe Jensen just told me that in the theater they say at least 3 things go wrong with every production. We're at like 9, so this should be 3 times as good as any theater production rehearsal. Before I say anything else, this. A night like this. Mayflies live along the river, high in the wet, hot air. Their lives last only a few hours. Their gray silk bodies circle the light above our boat landing. The Long John creaks against wood. Nothing to do but watch mayflies on the dock, the boat, the river, some dying before their time. That's a poem by Ken Brewer, guy who I met when I came to Logan 21 years ago. For those of you who know Ken, you'd know that you'd never mistake him for a mayfly. He was a big guy, not a mayfly. But also anyone who knew Ken for 30 seconds or 30 years or 40 years knows that our time with Ken was too short. I can't imagine a better way to honor his time with us than for us to be right here tonight on a night like this, outside, surrounded by these trees, watching that sun go down over those mountains, looking out over that valley that he loved so much. Thank you guys for being here. It's a special night for all of us, I think. Welcome to the first annual Ken Brewer Celebration of Writing. This is a commemoration to Ken Brewer and also a celebration of writing on this campus, in this town, Logan, Utah, in Cache Valley, in this state. And thinking about where we are and what's shaped this place, it's also a good time for us to recognize that this is that USU and all state USU institutions reside on the original territory of the 8 federally recognized tribes of Utah. Tribes that have been living, working, and residing on this land from time immemorial. These tribes are the Confederated Tribes of the Goshute Indians, Navajo Nation, Northern Ute Tribe, Northwestern Band of Shoshone, Paiute Indian Tribe of Utah, San Juan Southern Paiute, Skull Valley Band of Goshute, White Mesa Band of the Ute Mountain Ute. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this land, and we honor and respect the indigenous people still connected to the land on which we gather. We'd also like to thank tonight the English department, in particular Professors Phoebe Jensen and Jennifer Seiner, along with Emily Heaton in the development office for getting this celebration off the ground. Also Sari Jenkins for her help with the promotional materials, and Annie Nielsen for making sure that everything got taken care of. And yeah, I mean, we tried to take care of everything, but there's no videographer. There should have been. So we're gonna make do with our phones. We have a saxophone player now, but he kind of missed the beginning. So, you know, you all witnessed the tragedy of the sound system, but that seems like that's now taken care of. But we got it taken care of. It's gonna be a good night, and I'm excited that you are all here. None of this evening would be possible without the generous support of Glenn and Ann Wild. who were friends and colleagues of Ken's here at USU. The Wilds couldn't be here this evening, that's why we wanted to video it for them, but they asked that we read an introduction that they wrote for the celebration. Just a little bit of background on them. Ken Wild was a professor on campus. He taught English for a little while. He also taught English as a second language for a while. Back in the day, he also was really instrumental in getting distance education off the ground here, and literally off the ground. What distance education meant back then was that he'd get into an airplane and fly down to Vernal to give a lecture or two for a couple hours each evening when he went down there each week. So he was flying regularly to the other branch campuses to give these lessons. And Anne, in her own right, did a lot to preserve people's voices. She did a lot of work with the the Fife Folklore Archive. Did a lot of recordings of people's stories and has been instrumental in that way. So these are two people who are really interested in Utahns finding their voices, and that's something that Ken was interested in as well. So this is the introduction that Glenn and Ann wrote for us for tonight. Our friendship with Ken Brewer began in fall 1968. He was a new faculty member from New Mexico State University, where he had a close relationship with his writing mentor and inspiration, Keith Wilson. He was also a fellow student, friend, and business partner with Mark Medoff, whose play, Children of a Lesser God, would receive a Tony Award and later an Academy Award. This creative fellowship continued at Utah State University, where Ken engaged with Vanetta Nielsen and Moyle Q. Rice, both of whom had established writing classes. What Ken contributed to the writing program were poetry readings, something that he traced to the storytelling of Greek and Roman poets who entertained as cultural minstrels and creative historians. To Ken, poetry was also a performance, a reading aloud with an audience. And just a sidebar to their introduction, I don't know if you noticed when I was reading the poem, but I was doing my best Ken cadence meter. This is a very Ken. I see lots of nodding. People recognize Ken's thing. When he read his poems, you'd always see his hand out, keeping the beat, almost like you wanted to put a conductor's baton in that hand at some point. His own performance of his poems was read with a staccato strength, often with an underlined irony or humor. He encouraged Vanetta and Moyle Q to give readings of their own works, and as his influence grew in poetry and creative writing, he was able to bring poets and writers to campus that included his mentor, Keith Wilson, William Stafford, Gary Snyder, David Lee, and another mentor, Henry Taylor. Ken was also invited to read his poetry at colleges and universities throughout the West. As Ken's reputation grew in the Department of English, he began to strengthen and build a curriculum for creative writing. His efforts ultimately resulted in his selection as a poet laureate of Utah and the English Department's recognition of Ken Brewer's efforts by establishing the Ken Brewer Scholarship. We're proud to be the sponsors of the Ken Brewer Celebration of Writing, an annual event that will extend back to the roots of public celebrations of writing that Ken first brought to the campus of Utah State University. So again, thanks to Glenn and Ann Wild for sponsoring this evening for us. And even more so that they've given a gift not just to bring one night worth of reading to our community, but they've given us a gift that we can tuck away and pull the interest off of, and then we can have a reading every fall thanks to Glenn and Ann Wild. So please, would you just put your hands together for that? Let's say please do it for us. We have a special lineup for you tonight in honor of Ken. Our inaugural reader, Chris Kokinos, was a friend of Ken's, a former USU professor and the author or co-editor of 7 books of poetry and prose. We also aim to trace Ken's influence on this writing community by having 2 of his former students our very own Star Colebrook and Shannon Ballum read for you tonight. And then some of the students of his students and colleagues, Lauren McKinnon, Amrutha Obalasetti, Jay Payne, and Ann Schill are also going to read. And then, much as he would have were he here, we'd like to encourage any of you who brought a poem with you to come up and read at the open mic at the end of the evening. You'll notice that we had 3 fine musicians backing us tonight. You got sight of one of them as he came in and could hear the great playing of the bass and the drums by the other 2. They're going to put this little jazzy vibe in our festival tonight. And for those of you who are interested during the open mic, if you'd like to have a little musical accompaniment, they'll be ready to do that. They're also going to play as we gather together at the end to take off. I believe Chris has got some books to sell as well, so they'll be playing during that. So if you guys would like to purchase books, there's a table down here. Please do that either just after Chris is done reading or at the end of the evening. So that's it. Thank you guys so much for being here. I'm going to now introduce Michael Souter, who is going to introduce our guest of honor tonight.